Welcome back to Relatable Wisdom, the podcast where everyday people share the quotes that shaped how they see life, helping you discover wisdom for your own daily journey. Today's guest is Venchele Saint Dic, a public health writer and pathway coach who transforms lives through the power of words. She's working on a doctorate in public health leadership and has this beautiful way of weaving together resilience, mindfulness, and personal growth in everything she writes. Let's step into Venchele's world for a few minutes and hear the quote that has guided her path. Tell us your name and what you do.
So my name is Venchele Saint Dic, and I am the founder of Pathway Coach Writing, where I help people connect their stories to their lived experiences, and I help businesses and individuals use writing as a branding strategy.
Hey, thank you for accepting the invitation to be on the podcast, Venchele.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, what's your favorite quote?
My favorite quote, actually, that was a very, I had to really think about it. My favorite quote is, my healing did not come from bouncing back, but from blooming differently. That's my favorite quote.
My healing did not come from bouncing back, but from blooming differently. There's a lot of explaining that needs to be done on that quote. Okay. What does it mean? What are you talking about?
I think for me, like I'm probably referencing like my growing up in another country. Even though I was, born in the US. And so I grew up in the Caribbean, which is like a place full of color, complexity, and contradiction. And so when we're talking about blooming differently and the origin of it, when I came to the US, like I had to learn to carry two identities at once, so one part of me was deeply rooted in tradition, right? In the cadence of Creole, in the rhythm of community. And then the other part had to quickly learn to adapt, to new systems, to being the only one in certain rooms and to navigating a culture that didn't always see me. And so I used to think that, strength meant becoming invisible, pushing through, being quiet, staying in line. But over time, I realized that I wasn't here to blend in. I was really here to bloom differently. I didn't return to who I was before the disruption of, again, just having to navigate these two different cultures. So I grew into someone new, someone a little bit more layered, a little bit more intentional, and unapologetically whole. And so that's when I began to understand that blooming differently isn't a detour. That's the path.
Okay, it's making sense little by little. When you say bouncing back, what exactly does that mean? And would you be kind enough to explain that with an example?
So bouncing back, I think one example might be my worldview on leadership, especially now. So my background is in public health. And I think in that space, sometimes we reward people for how quickly they can bounce back. So for me, I celebrate bounce back from any sort of adversity. I celebrate the comeback. They want you to celebrate the pivot, the resilience, but my leadership has never been about returning to the person I was before the struggle. It's really been about evolving into the leader I had to become because of that struggle. So there's this focus on what could be instead of what was. So whether it was navigating, just advocating for things or guiding people through burnout and change, my approach to leadership has always been deeply human. So I lead with lived experience. I value pause just as much as progress. And I do believe that softness, when rooted in clarity, is a strength. So when I think about bouncing back, it's really about learning to challenge the idea that resilience is about speed. Sometimes it's about surrender. Sometimes it's about saying, I no longer fit the container that I was in before. And that's not weakness. That's wisdom. So that's not bouncing back. That's, again, blooming differently. And sometimes when you talk about the word resilience, because it's such an overused word, sometimes, someone had to kindly remind me, we shouldn't be living in systems that create situations where you have to even be resilient. You should be provided with the resources that you need in order to take care of yourself and take care of your loved ones.
Yes. Okay. Bouncing back, blooming differently.
Hmm.
How long ago did you come to the realization of this quote? Let's take a quick pause. If you're enjoying this conversation and want more thought-provoking ideas straight to your inbox, join the Relatable Wisdom email list. It's free, quick, and filled with bite-sized insights, inspiring quotes, and behind-the-scenes reflections from our guests. Just head to relatablewisdom.com/join. That is relatablewisdom.com/join, or tap the link in the show notes. And hey, subscribing to the podcast helps more than you think, and it's free. So if you haven't already, hit that follow button wherever you're listening. All right, let's get back to the conversation.
I had to really think about my life story, and I had to really think about just how it fit into the current time, the current season that I'm in. I came into that realization of coming up with this quote through writing, because again, to me, it all goes back to my relationship with writing. And that's what I talk about when I say my healing, right? Because writing is definitely used as a form of a source of groundedness, if you will. And so I just really needed to put my emotions, like on paper, and really try to understand like which language I would use, right? Especially during uncertain times, where people might feel overwhelmed or disconnected. And so that's how the quote came to be. I had to journal about certain times in my life that are applicable to that quote. And it's difficult because you have to sort of reminisce, and sort of give yourself permission to feel without needing to explain. And the quote in and of itself is really about transformation and a reckoning of not dismissing the struggles that you've been through. It's just you're trying to look forward to something different, to new energetic vibes, if you will, that can get you or that can help you become the person that you're meant to be. So that's again going back to this whole permission to feel without needing to explain, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, earlier on you mentioned that in order to come to this realization, you had to spend some time to journal, to look back and ask yourself, what are the experiences I've had and what are the takeaways from those experiences? Now, would you be kind enough to share some of those stories that apply to this quote, or where the quote applies?
I mean, I've already, shared the part about
Yeah,
public
yeah,
health. Yes, and then also just growing up in another country. So I guess like one
that's cool.
example could be the healing piece about, writing as transformation. I think writing in and of itself um, is part of my transformation, not just as a writer, but as a person. Um, and I think by journaling, that private act of journaling, can turn into something communal. And it makes me think about the work that I do with my clients at Pathway Coach Writing. I help people write their own stories. And sometimes that includes stories that are rooted in trauma, identity, and legacy. And when we think about my quote, it's really about realizing the incredible power of the written word, right? To hold pain and possibility in the same space. Um, so storytelling to me is more than therapy. It becomes a way to reclaim agency. And so when I put it back into context with the quote, healing doesn't just happen in one big
Yeah,
breakthrough. It just really happens in the quiet act of writing truths that, I was once afraid to name. And that's where like we can talk about the blooming piece, right? That's how I bloomed.
yeah. I like the fact you said that it's blooming differently because someone might hear you and say, "Oh, she writes, and that's how she blooms." I'm like, "Oh, I should write." And you you try it and it doesn't work for you. You realize that, oh, something else that works for me is, singing and playing music, right? That really, really helps me to, to recollect my thoughts, to have everything, what's the word? To have everything kind of like in control. The way there's this brief pause where the world is not moving so fast. It's like a snapshot in that moment, just like in writing where you you step back, you zoom out from the situation, and you get to look at it as if you're peering from outside the earth. And same thing for some persons it's music, for other persons it's doing what's called martial arts and all that. But still on the idea of blooming differently, one could say, okay, well you have to write, and like, yeah, I tried that stuff, it's not working. And every time you keep trying and you keep trying and you keep failing, not realizing that that's not just the path that works for you.
Yes, and I think that you're getting to the point that when we talk about blooming differently, yes, people have to redefine what growth looks like for them, right? So, instead of aiming for perfection or returning to normal, people have to ask themselves, like, what does growth look like for who I am right now? Right. And that's why, like, I stopped chasing the version of me, people expected, and instead began shaping the version that I needed. Um, by setting boundaries, and most importantly understanding that sometimes healing doesn't always involve forgiveness right now, and it doesn't have to be forgiveness of other people. It could be forgiveness of yourself, for who
Yeah,
you were, what you probably did at some point in your past, and you're no longer that person. It's like Oprah would say, you when you know better, you do better. um and also it's also about honoring the season that you're in. Blooming differently means knowing when to bloom, not just how to bloom. Like you talked about music. um just I talked about the writing, using writing as a form of transformation. You talked about music being another way, to let your thoughts again just draw some inspiration um on the next steps that you want to take in your life. And sometimes, people can be in a season of stillness, pruning or waiting for the right soil, and so that it reminds me that blooming doesn't never fails. Like when you choose to bloom, it's just sometimes you have to know when when to bloom, so that you're not planting in the wrong place, if that makes sense. Um, and then it's also about letting go of the old blueprint. Your past doesn't have to be your template. Blooming differently means giving yourself permission to create a new form, because that's the theme, the recurring theme in what we're saying, right? So, for
yeah,
example, if your family taught you survival through silence, your bloom might be using your voice,
yeah,
because
yeah,
sometimes silence can be seen as safety. But your bloom might come when you choose to speak, to write, to own the narrative, to become more self-aware. So
yeah,
that's where I am when I think about this quote.
yeah. When you mentioned you explained blooming differently, one of the things you said is we have to forgive ourselves. And when people hear forgiveness, that's the last thought that crosses their mind. Usually, like, okay, oh, that's my neighbor that wronged me. Oh, that my parents, my dad, my mom, all those persons, my siblings, right? It's on rare occasions people talk about themselves, and a lot of persons are still holding the things, the as you said earlier on, some of the things they did not knowing better, and because of that they have this guilt. It's there, right? It's not like towards someone, but it's just towards themselves. They cannot forgive themselves to live another life and start blooming differently. They're still holding on to the past and all the chaos of the past.
And I guess like in this situation, if they're holding on to the past, the wound becomes like a weakness, because that's part of their root system. You know, the trauma from, for example, like like abandonment issues, or people who have abandonment issues, you know, might become the soil for building connection and compassion with others. Like, I think it's a question of how you frame it, how you reframe the situation so that it can work for you and not against you. And so that you can make room for something richer to take root.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Venchele, for sharing your favorite quotes with me.
You're welcome. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
and thank you for helping me make sense of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Where can my listeners learn more about you and what you do?
So your listeners can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on all social media sites, including Instagram, by using either my name, which you'll provide, I know you'll provide in the caption, or looking for Pathway Coach Writing.
Yeah, just in case someone is, walking past and they're listening to this on, audio platforms and all that, and maybe they don't really have the time, probably in the bus or something like that. Can you just say the name out loud so that they can get it?
Yes, it's Venchele Saint Dic.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Do you have a website?
Yes, I do have a website. It's www.pathwaycoachwriting.com.
Pathwaycoachwriting.com.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Vincelli.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's been an absolute delight chatting with you. You've been listening to Relatable Wisdom, and I've been your host, Wisdom Okonkwo. You've been listening to the podcast where every story, quote, and insight helps you see life a little differently. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow the show on your favorite podcast app and share it with someone who loved the conversation. For more inspiring voices and timeless wisdom, visit relatablewisdom.com. Until next time, keep living, learning, and collecting wisdom that matters most to you.